Welcome to The Psychology of Us. This podcast is created by RJ Starr, a public intellectual and independent psychology educator. The material presented is educational and interpretive, examining psychological life as a domain of understanding rather than intervention. It does not provide therapy, diagnosis, or professional guidance. Each episode stands as a complete work of public psychological inquiry.
Welcome to The Psychology of Us, created by RJ Starr.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're joining us for this deep dive today, because we are tackling a feeling that I think almost everyone has experienced, but very few of us can actually put into words or properly explain.
Yeah, it's a really elusive feeling.
Right. And we are on a mission today to figure out why scrolling online today feels so incredibly isolating, like why the digital world feels so cold and hollow compared to, the early days of social media.
It really is a profound, almost invisible shift that happened. We've gone from feeling deeply, genuinely connected in these spaces to feeling entirely alone in what is technically a completely crowded digital room.
Yeah, totally.
And the psychological mechanisms behind why that happened are incredibly revealing about human nature.
Absolutely. So to understand this, our deep dive today centers entirely on this brilliant essay titled "The Day the Internet Stopped Feeling Like a Room." And right at the top, I want to make sure we introduce the source material properly. This was written by Professor RJ Starr, identifying him as the author of this work and the creator of psychological architecture.
A fantastic framework.
It really is. And he paints this incredibly vivid, kind of nostalgic picture of the early internet, specifically the early days of Facebook. And he describes it as a trusted room.
A trusted room, exactly.
Think back to that time for a second. If you're listening, just remember what that felt like. Sharing was easy. It wasn't strategic. It was completely unoptimized. You would log on and post about what you were having for lunch or where you were going, maybe upload a terribly lit, blurry picture of your dog sleeping on the couch.
It was undeniably mundane. That's the best word for it.
Okay.
But that was the actual magic of it, right? It was unremarkable, highly imperfect content, but the space itself felt completely alive.
Yes, alive.
Because you weren't posting for reach or trying to, hack an algorithm. You weren't agonizing over engagement metrics. You were just sharing within a known, comfortable social perimeter.
You knew who was there.
Exactly. Your audience was your friends, your coworkers, maybe some extended family members. The boundaries were loose, yes, but they felt fundamentally human.
I have to admit, I really, really miss those quirky, unremarkable posts. I miss logging on and seeing that a casual acquaintance was eating a turkey sandwich on a random Tuesday, or that someone was annoyed about the traffic on their commute. There was a genuine warmth to it.
There really was.
And I think it's very easy for us to look back now and cringe at how much we overshared. Like, oh, why did I post that? But there was a real tangible function to all that mundane posting, wasn't there?
There absolutely was a function, and it's deeply rooted in our biology. Those posts were not broadcasts for attention, which is how we tend to judge them today through our modern lens. They were what psychologists call low-intensity affiliation signals.
Wait, low-intensity affiliation signals? In normal human speak, you just mean letting people know we exist without shouting it from the rooftops.
Precisely. They were small, everyday declarations of presence. It was simply a way of saying, I am here, it's a small part of my day, you are welcome to witness it.
Right. I'm just here.
They didn't transmit vital, breaking information. They weren't profound, but they maintained relational continuity. And this kind of signaling is ancient human behavior.
Ancient? Like, how far back are we talking?
Since the dawn of human gathering, humans have always bonded over seemingly trivial exchanges. Think about how we gather around a kitchen island or a water cooler in an office. We talk about the weather, we talk about our meals, our daily routines, our pets.
Yeah, that's true.
These aren't the highlight reels of a human life. They are the glue that holds the community together. Belonging is built on accumulation, not exception. It is sustained through repeated, low-stakes acknowledgement, rather than big, impressive, performative moments.
That makes so much sense. I want you, the listener, to think about your own closest friendships for a second. Think about the people you feel most connected to right now. Is it because they throw you a massive birthday party once a year?
Probably not.
Exactly. Or is it because they text you on a random Wednesday to tell you they just saw a funny-looking bird, or that they spilled coffee on their shirt? It is almost always those boring, daily text messages that keep the relationship alive, not the grand gestures.
It is the low-stakes presence that makes us feel safe with one another. It proves that we are continually accepted in our most ordinary state. But as we know, that atmosphere online changed dramatically.
Very dramatically.
And what is so critical to understand here is that the shift didn't happen because of a platform policy update. No CEO sent out a memo saying, please stop posting about your lunch. It changed entirely through culture.
It drifted in sideways. It happened through jokes, through commentary, through a collective shift in attitude. The culture quietly reframed all of that ordinary, mundane sharing as faintly embarrassing. And the essay brings up this very specific, perfect anecdote to illustrate this. The cultural jerk that emerged, comparing social media posts to stopping strangers on the street just to show them a picture of your roast beef sandwich.
What's fascinating here is how that specific kind of humor functions as a mechanism of social control.
Social control. Say more about that.
Well, it sounds clever, right? It sounds worldly and detached. But rhetorically, the roast beef sandwich joke works because it completely strips away the context of the behavior. It takes a relational act.
Like sharing a meal with your community.
Exactly, and it reframes it into a spectacle. It turns casual adjacency into an exhibition. Early Facebook wasn't a billboard on a highway. It was a hallway. It was a shared break room.
That is such a good distinction.
You weren't forcing strangers to look at your lunch. You're letting people you already knew catch a glimpse of your day.
So it's not that the sandwich photo itself was inherently bad or annoying, it's that the joke intentionally misinterpreted the environment. It made the behavior seem inherently performative. And once something is framed as a performance, it suddenly invites evaluation.
And evaluation is a powerful force.
Yeah.
It literally changes the human nervous system.
Wow. Literally changes it.
Yes. When you feel that a behavior is a performance, the implication is that there is an audience, and that the audience is actively judging you. Judgment collapses ease. We are incredibly sensitive creatures. We calibrate to emotional temperature long before anyone directly corrects us.
Right, we read the room.
We learn socially. So we didn't need mass bullying to stop sharing. We didn't need to be burned by the stove to know it was hot. Ambient conditioning and subtle eye-rolling were more than enough to change the entire ecosystem.
Let's dig into that ambient conditioning for a second, because it's like walking into a room and immediately sensing the vibe is off, right? No one has to tell you to be quiet. You just feel the tension and lower your voice.
That is a great analogy. When people feel evaluated, when they sense that off vibe, spontaneity just dies. Self-monitoring takes over completely. Instead of just existing in the space, you start screening every single impulse through a filter of potential judgment.
Asking yourself, is this interesting enough? Is this too much?
It's too boring. Will someone roll their eyes at me if I post this?
And when self-monitoring replaces presence, the social space cannot survive. You just withdraw, you become deeply self-conscious, and self-consciousness suppresses behavior way better than outward anger ever could.
The silence that followed in those digital spaces wasn't indifference. It wasn't that people suddenly didn't care about their friends anymore. It was learned restraint. People learned not to respond, not to post, not to expose themselves to the ambient judgment of the room.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because there was another massive structural force accelerating this emotional chill, and it is this concept of context collapse. In the early days, the audience felt bounded. You knew who was in the room. But as the platforms expanded and grew into these massive behemoths, that illusion totally eroded. Suddenly, your boss, your high school bully, your ex-partner, and your sweet grandmother were all standing in the exact same silent digital room staring at you.
The audience became completely undefined and, frankly, unmanageable. And when we look at this structural change in human behavior, it's essential to, again, bring up Professor RJ Starr, identifying him as the author of this work and the creator of psychological architecture.
Yes, his insights here are key.
His framework helps us map out exactly what happens when our social walls vanish like this. When you do not know who you are talking to, or when you are talking to everyone at once, you simply stop talking like yourself.
You have to. You cannot possibly speak to your boss the exact same way you speak to your best friend or the way you speak to your grandma. It's socially impossible to craft a single message that lands perfectly with all those different relationships. So when they are all observing you at once, what do? Do we just freeze?
Many people did freeze, but others adapted. And the text explains that people primarily adapted through irony. Irony became the ultimate survival strategy in a collapsed context.
Because irony is a shield.
Exactly. Irony is audience-proof. It can survive misinterpretation. In a space where the audience is suddenly unknown, unknowable, and potentially hostile, irony allows you to participate without being locatable.
That's a fascinating way to put it, unlocatable.
You can post a meme or a sarcastic joke or something highly detached, and it signals to the room that you are aware that you are online and that you understand the culture. But crucially, it doesn't reveal any actual vulnerability. You get to speak without ever being pinned down.
It gives you plausible deniability. If your boss questions a post or your grandma is confused by it, you can just retreat and say, oh, I was just joking, it's just a meme. It functions as emotional armor.
Sincerity became a massive, massive risk.
Right, because if you post something completely genuine, say a heartfelt paragraph about how much you love your dog, you are exposed, you are earnest. And in a space that was becoming heavily surveilled, highly reputational, and focused on metrics, you desperately needed that armor.
Irony didn't take over the internet because people suddenly became cruel or unfeeling overnight. It emerged as a defense mechanism because sincerity began to feel deeply unsafe. But we have to recognize the severe consequence of that shift.
Which is what?
When irony becomes the dominant emotional register of a space, sincerity starts to feel incredibly awkward. Warmth starts to feel naive. Casual, unpolished presence feels embarrassing. The culture doesn't have to outright forbid authenticity. It just makes it highly uncomfortable to execute.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because alongside this emotional shift toward irony, there was a complete transformation in how we viewed our very own identities online. The essay notes that we stopped being users and we started acting like brands. We underwent the professionalization of the self.
Yes, and this happened simply as our reputational awareness increased. As the platforms grew, the stakes felt higher. Think about how a brand operates. A brand cannot afford to be mundane.
Right.
A brand has to be highly curated, strategic, and polished. A brand must constantly justify the attention it is asking for from the consumer. Therefore, in this new digital economy, attention became the primary currency.
And in that highly pressurized environment, the old photo of your Tuesday turkey sandwich didn't disappear because it was merely silly. It disappeared because it was off-brand. It didn't offer enough value to justify the attention it consumed.
Exactly.
Identity became a managed project rather than a natural expression. We started curating our lives like magazine editors.
Constantly.
I want you to think about your own habits for a second. How often do you pull out your phone, take a picture of something completely genuine that brought you a moment of joy, maybe a weird cloud formation or a messy desk? You start to type out a caption, and then you delete the whole thing.
I think we all do that.
You scrap it because it doesn't quite fit your image, or it ruins your grid, or it doesn't align with your aesthetic. We constantly stop ourselves from being genuine because we are managing our personal PR.
We do, because ordinary sharing became a liability. Social life turned into reputational maintenance. And it is so crucial to stress a point the essay makes here. This withdrawal, this retreat from everyday sharing, was not a moral failure by the users.
That's reassuring.
It wasn't a loss of courage or a sudden onset of vanity. It was a highly adaptive response to a changing environment. When your warmth is no longer reciprocated by the room, when it is met with silence, evaluation, or irony withdrawal, is how you conserve your emotional energy.
That reframing is so important. If you walk down the street and wave at someone and they just stare at you coldly, you might try waving one or two more times. But eventually you stop waving. You would be foolish to keep waving at a wall.
Precisely. Thin responses trained our hesitation. We put something out there, received little to no warmth in return, and we learned to hesitate. Hesitation over time trained silence. And then silence simply became the norm.
It just became how things are.
The essay captures this dynamic beautifully of one specific line. It says, "The room didn't empty because no one wanted to be there. It emptied because no one wanted to go first."
Wow, it emptied because no one wanted to go first. That is such a heavy realization. It's not that we abandon the desire for community. We just got locked in this Mexican standoff of vulnerability.
Yeah.
No one wants to be the first to drop the armor.
That's too risky.
And that leads directly into this incredible ultimate irony that we are living with today, the loneliness paradox.
Yeah.
The exact same cultural posture that mocked the lunch photos, that rolled its eyes at the mundane updates and demanded high-value curated content, is now suffering from extreme loneliness and hollowness.
It's tragic, really.
People are scrolling endlessly, totally starved for contact. They desperately want the connection, but they want it without the risk.
Which is psychologically impossible. You cannot have connection without risk. Connection inherently requires someone to speak first. It requires someone to offer their presence, their genuine self, without any guarantees of how it will be received.
But you have to step out onto the ice.
Exactly. But our culture, through years of ambient conditioning, trained that risk right out of the public space. We optimize for safety, for armor, and for engagement metrics, and in doing so, we optimize connection right out of existence.
So if the need for connection is still there, did we just evolve past the need for low-intensity affiliation signals?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the biological and psychological need didn't die at all. It just fled. The warmth migrated. When the public squares, your main feeds on social media, became too cold, too heavily evaluated, to too reputational, people sought shelter.
They went looking for a new room.
They moved their warmth into bounded, safe spaces. This is why we have seen the massive rise of private group chats, Discord servers, and close friends lists. These are smaller, gated spaces where the audience is actually known again. The context is reestablished, and the emotional temperature can be regulated.
So human sociality still totally depends on low-stakes presence and casual acknowledgement. We still need to show people our roast beef sandwiches. We just took the behavior underground to places where we know we won't be judged for it.
Precisely.
And that leaves our current reality in the broad public digital spaces feeling incredibly stark. We have an endless fire hose of content, but almost zero actual contact. There's plenty to consume, influencers, brands, viral videos, but almost nothing that actually invites you, the individual, to speak.
That is the real tragedy of this cultural shift. The tragedy isn't the loss of the blurry dog photos or the lunch updates themselves. Those are just symptoms. The tragedy is that we collectively learn to treat everyday human presence as unworthy of a response.
It's heartbreaking when you put it that way.
Cultures don't only collapse through overt hostility or aggression. They thin out through emotional cooling. They die of 1,000 tiny cuts of irony and self-censorship. And once that lesson settles into our bones, rebuilding the community becomes incredibly difficult because, technically, nothing obvious went wrong.
That's the insidious part. No explicit rule was broken. No one was formally banned from being sincere.
No. But something essential, something fundamentally warm and human, withdrew from the room. And it's very hard to coax it back out.
So what does this all mean? If we distill the key takeaways from this entire deep dive into the source material, it is that our public digital spaces cooled not from explicit hostility or algorithmic mandates, but from a learned restraint. We absorbed an ambient cultural conditioning that made sincerity feel unsafe and made irony feel like necessary armor.
Very well said.
We experienced massive context collapse, which forced us to professionalize our personal identities. And in the process of protecting ourselves from evaluation, we killed the everyday, unoptimized presence that made the internet feel like a human room in the first place.
It really is a fascinating journey of human adaptation.
It is. Before we wrap up this conversation, I want to give a final credit to the mind behind these insights. We owe a huge thanks to Professor RJ Starr, identifying him as the author of this work and the creator of psychological architecture, for providing such a profound framework for understanding our own digital behavior. It really puts so much of our daily anxiety into perspective.
This raises an important question, a thought to linger on after you finish listening. If true connection requires someone to brave the cold and speak first, what is the personal cost to you of waiting for someone else to make that move in your own life?
Oh, that's a powerful question.
Are we permanently outsourcing our courage to private group chats and locked servers? Or is there a way to bring a tiny spark of unoptimized warmth back into the cold public spaces we navigate every day?
That is something to really mull over the next time you find yourself endlessly scrolling through a feed that feels entirely empty. Maybe the next time you see something mundane, you don't scroll past it. Maybe you just leave a little warmth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate your curiosity, and we will catch you next time. Keep exploring.
This has been The Psychology of Us. The work presented here is part of a public psychological archive by RJ Starr. It is educational and interpretive, not clinical or advisory. Episodes are published as finished reflections and are intended to be encountered as complete works.